The project I'm going to present is kind of crosses various interdisciplinary boundaries. I'll try out various. I will be stepping in the territory of many of you. And many of you are better experts on various things I'm going to touch on than I am. I'm kind of trying to connect different things. And so please feel free to interrupt and ask questions and give suggestions and so on. Let's see how this works. So who am I? I'm actually a psychologist. I have a PhD in psychology from Zagreb. That's Croatia, that's Balkans. And then I spent 8 years at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, where I studied decision-making, both individual decision-making, rules and strategies, and group decision-making, social and also social judgments, spread of beliefs, and social cognition in general. And since 2015, I'm studying human social dynamics at the Santa Fe Institute, which some of you may know. It's Institute for Complexity Science. It has been founded by physicists from Los Alamos who decided to do something good for the world. And this institute is a wonderful interdisciplinary place with perhaps 30 people who are more continuously there. Nobody is permanently there. And a large number of visitors, so come visit. And we are just working on projects in all areas of life, and I'm working on social complexity issues of social dynamics. And the issue of cooperation was long on my mind. Coming from Balkans, I was always wondering, what happens? How come that human cooperation can be so great and develop so nicely, and people can do such wonderful things together, and at some points it can just break, and the whole countries go to war and do difficult things to each other. And so I realized that, by thinking about it for years, I kind of realized that if I want to understand how human cooperation starts and breaks, maybe I need to understand how it developed in the first place. What were the first origins of human cooperation? Why we and not other primates and other species became so cooperative on large scale? And this kind of really took off after I came to the Santa Fe Institute, where I was able to discuss with colleagues from fields of biology, anthropology, archaeology, economics, and others, and really kind of put some more sense into this thinking. And so today I will present this project. The brief overview is that I'll present the puzzle of cooperation and give an overview of current accounts of human cooperation, then give some data about early human environment, sociality, and cognition of early human ancestors. Then I'll present our computational model of early human cooperation and talk about role of interdependence, and then I'll discuss and speculate. And again, interrupt me at any time with questions. The work is done with Michael Lachman, who is an evolutionary biologist from the Santa Fe Institute, and he's helping with some of the formalizations of this model, and all mistakes are mine, not his. All right, the puzzle is, in my mind, why are humans so cooperative? And why not, for instance, baboons, monkeys who lived in similar circumstances as our ancestors, in the kind of mosaic, dry savannas, where there is a pronounced seasonality and where individual foraging is often difficult, and when maybe the value of group foraging might be higher. So why did not they develop more cooperative abilities? Or why not chimps, our closest relatives, who have some of the similar cognitive abilities as perhaps our early ancestors? They already use some tools. They can hunt in groups. So why didn't they develop some more advanced forms of human cooperation? And so this is kind of the framework in which I'm thinking. So why can we find a way to explain why humans developed such advanced forms of cooperation and not these other primates? And the existing accounts of human cooperation are many. In particular, there are, of course, many general mechanisms that have been proposed to explain cooperation. Kin selection, mutualisms, direct reciprocity, group-level selection, and so on. And there are many elegant models on a relatively high level of abstraction that really work well and can explain cooperation and can explain it in a wide range of organisms, from bacteria to mammals. So And because they're made to be so elegant and abstract, they, of course, cannot include the details that might be specific for early human evolution and to help us discern why we and not other primates developed cooperation. And so there are several accounts proposed for specifically human, to explain the specifically human cooperation. One is social exchange theory by Cosmides and Tooby. Their proposal is that cooperation that we see today evolved in stable bands that were quite closely related and where people have relatively long lifespans and where mechanisms of direct reciprocity and kinship could have contributed to heightened levels of cooperation, and that basically cooperation we see today is a reflection of cooperation developed in these circumstances. It's some would call it a big mistake. So we are kind of mistaking the present environments for these early environments of closely knit, small bands. One objection to this account is that large-scale cooperation of humans is somehow different and requires some kind of different explanation. It has been observed, of course, that we differentiate between closest relatives and people who are less related to us, and instinctively want to less cooperate with people who are less closely related. But still, large-scale cooperation happens. We cooperate across groups, across times. And to explain this, some people would say we need a different account, an additional account. And Boyd, who's here, and Richardson developed the best-known account, which is a cultural group selection account, where thanks to unique human social cognitive abilities, such as abilities to learn from each other, to maintain cumulative culture, to develop and adhere to social norms. Also, the use of symbolic group demarcations have contributed to leveling of within-group differences, an increase of between-group differences, which then set the stage for group-level selection. And then there were additions to this account where warfare, for instance, proposed by Bowles and Gintis and others, might have been an additional factor that promoted group selection because it increased the between-group competition. And this account is really well documented. There are good analytical and computational models, and this seems to be quite well understood. A question with this account is, where did these advanced human social abilities came from in the first place? So how did that develop? So where does this heightened propensity for or ability to learn socially, to form norms, and adhere to norms, where did this come from? And why would that develop if there was not already some benefit of grouping in the first place? So it's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. We had some social cognitive abilities that enabled us development of large-scale cooperation, but where do these social cognitive abilities came from? So lately, several authors proposed so-called stepwise evolution of cooperation, where cooperation developed in at least two stages. One is this early evolution of cooperation where, due to mutualistic benefits of cooperative foraging or cooperative breeding, we developed the initial social cognitive capacities that then later on enabled leveling of within-group differences, increase of between-group differences, and the group-level selection for larger-scale cooperation. And then there is a gap. I was looking for a nice picture to put here of a gap, but I couldn't find it, so there is a gap between the early on, these early stages and the later stages, because later stages, as I say, are so well documented. We know how this might have happened, but the early on stages are still relatively less well computationally developed. Those are mostly verbal accounts, which you say, well, yeah, in this arid and changeable environments of early Pleistocene, it might have been good to forage cooperatively, or to help each other with breeding, but it's not more precisely pinned down how this might have happened. And so this is, of course, obviously, I'm getting to this, I'm trying to kind of fill this gap a little bit. There is one other recent computational model of early human cooperation. That's the model also developed by collaborators of Richardson and Paul Smaldino, who developed a computational model of cooperative breeding. So here they assume family groups who are closely related and who already have a propensity for cooperative breeding. And then they look in what kind of environments will this propensity be more likely to spread culturally, to spread through social learning. And they find that cooperative breeding within family groups increases in harsh environments. And you see this account, and it kind of really demarcates nicely some conditions, more precisely, in which cooperative breeding develops. They still require the social learning element where cooperative breeding trait spreads culturally. And then they rely on this kind of kinship mechanism and group selection mechanisms to spread this. And I think this is great, and I'm kind of trying to build on that. At the same time, requiring even less and being even less ambitious of what our early ancestors might have been able to do. So the current model is contributing to filling this gap by modeling food sharing with unrelated individuals and assuming no social learning or social norms, and basically relying on possibility that interdependence between humans, which is just a within species mutualism kind of mechanism, might have developed because of interaction of particular environmental circumstances, social structure, and very basic cognitive abilities of our early ancestors. Okay, so this is all nice and well, but so how do we put this in some kind of computational model? So here we started to dig into various literatures on early human evolutionary history, and I will pass through it, and many of you will see that I missed many things, and please come later or ask or tell me, when you see obvious mistakes. But okay, so this is what we came up with a timeline of human evolutionary history, where here we have a time from 4 million years ago to approximately present day. And then we have species that were present at different time points. Then we have the climate that was prevalent at that time, so those are kind of environmental circumstances. Then we have some aspects of social structure, population density, presence of conflict, division of labor, and then some cognitive abilities that were purported by different authors to be developed in different parts, and how existing accounts of human cooperation fit on this scale. So I'll go. Do you see these small things, or kind of? Okay, I'll read it. Basically, this is just an overview we all know approximately of what species of our ancestors lived in different times. So here we have Australopithecus afarensis until about 2.95 million years ago. We have Homo habilis around latest dating 2.8. We have Homo erectus around 1.89, and then Neanderthals and us around 200,000 years ago. We have climate. So not even on this map. Up to about 3.5 million years ago, or 3 million years ago, the climate was kind of stable and relatively warm, or warmer than today. And then it started to become colder and more variable, both on long-term scales, and also it became more seasonal. Also, year-round, there were now more pronounced seasonality. So this becomes quite difficult, and then it's the points where are basically the first ancestors of, so the first Homo appears is around at this time when the climate really becomes more variable, more dry, more seasonal. And the whole human evolutionary history is basically happening in these extremely variable times. So we have cooler, dry, more variable climate, more open wooded or bushy grassland, and alternating wet and dry seasons. And only in the last 11,000 years ago or so, 11,000 years or so, we have relatively stable climate that we see today. So what about the social structure? You know how estimates are extremely difficult to make, and what I could find is estimates of population density for before a million years ago to 10,000 years ago, and to more the present day. And some estimates are that population density was extremely, extremely scarce, one person on 100 miles squared. Then later on, 1 in 10. 1 person in 10 miles squared. And current chimps, for instance, live in, have densities that are 10 times at least higher than this. And then modern hunter-gatherers have 1 person in 1 to 20 persons in 10 miles squared. So of course, it's difficult to know how this population density is measured and what is exactly the area that is. But okay, we certainly can say that the population density was quite scarce, I would say, after this. Then the presence of large-scale group conflict, which plays prominently in many of these accounts, we actually don't have much archaeological evidence for it throughout, in the large part of human evolutionary history. And the first kind of more plausible evidence is between 12 to 14,000 years ago from Jebel Sahaba in Nubia, where a grave was found with 61 skeletons, of which approximately half might have had or had evidence of projectile injuries. And then there is strong evidence of increasing frequency of both homicides and warfare from that time. And then what about some kind of other social structure? Well, Marlowe suggests that there was some kind of sexual division of labor already 2.5 to 2 million years ago. That it could be that women, because they had to tend to, they had these children, they couldn't practice so much hunting as men could, and so somehow naturally it happened that most of the hunting was done by men, but most of the foraging and childcare happened by women. By no means exclusive, and of course there is a lot of intermixture. But then what has been quite well documented is this fission-fusion dynamics, where a band of maybe 100 individuals separates on regular basis in smaller foraging groups that forage from maybe just a day or maybe for a few hours or maybe longer days, and then fuse back together with a band, with a mother band. And then the final piece is that actually, contrary to some suggestions, the relationship, the family, the kinship relationship within the band were actually not so strong. According to data by Hill et al., who were studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, only around 25% of the band is closely related to an individual, while others have no relations or are spouses from a brother or sister and so on. So actually, kinship relationships within at least modern hunter-gatherer bands are quite low, quite scarce. Okay, and then finally, what were the cognitive abilities? Well, we know that already chimps use tools, can hunt in groups, have some tolerate scrounging at least of other individuals after group hunt, have some basic empathy towards individuals in trouble, have some basic theory of mind. And perhaps we can use that as a proxy for how maybe Australopithecus afarensis could have, what kind of cognitive abilities that these individuals might have had. And I'm taking it. So I'm starting from these very basic abilities where there is some sensitivity to another individual's suffering, but there is rarely, if ever, food sharing. So food sharing is rarely done. And then there is rarely, or there is never, helping individuals from other groups. So it's all kind of within group. And then there is basic tools and some ability to hunt in groups. Chimps hunt in groups that they hunt small colobus monkeys and so. That represents only a small part of their diet, maybe only 10%, but they are kind of able to do it. And then some authors would say that maybe around 400,000 years ago or even later, we are now reaching the part where we have some kind of ability for social learning, for cumulative culture, for more advanced theory of mind and social norms, and even later for linguistic capabilities or group beneficial norms. And obviously there is a gap here. We don't actually know how did we come from this to that. And then later on, of course, in Neolithic, we have more advanced things. All right. And so how does this all map to the accounts of human cooperation? So as I mentioned, there are accounts that can be placed more in the earlier part of human evolutionary history and those that can be placed in the later part. So these accounts that talk about cooperative breeding and cooperative foraging as the first impetus for the heightened interdependence and cooperation between in early human groups are placed, their authors placed them around 2 million years ago. And then the group selection accounts by Boyd and Richardson and later Bowes and Gintis, the authors mentioned something like 400,000 years ago, 150, 100 years ago, 100,000 years ago. So again, there is something that's going on here which we still did not conceptualize so well, but we know that it might have been something related to foraging and breeding. And then once we have social cognition developed, then we can have these accounts. And social exchange theory is kind of not really well positioned, but it's probably somewhere around here. All right. So altogether, the group selection accounts where we already assume advanced social learning is happening around here, in around kind of mid to late Pleistocene, while the accounts I'm interested in and want to model are happening around here 2 million years ago or even earlier, at the first time when the climate started to change. Okay, so now what? How do we put this in a computational model? With computational model, I use it interchangeably with agent-based model, where I have little agents living in certain environment, following certain simple rules and seeing what happens. All right. So I'm assuming this kind of cognition of Australopithecus afarensis, which I modeled based on chimp cognition. So basic tool use, ability to group hunt, basic empathy, no food sharing, no intergroup cooperation. Living in such kind of environments, which are dry, seasonal, where value of individual foraging might have been quite low. So it's possible to dig some tubers, to find some berries. In certain areas, in certain times of year, it's really difficult to find something on one's own. And now this ability to hunt in groups might come handy. And so in my model, I model the value of individual foraging by this kind of green, somewhat variable trend, which I assume keeps individuals just barely above the starvation level. The red line is starvation level. If you fall below the starvation level, you are kind of dead. And then I play with the value of this group catch, or the difference between the value of potential group catch and the value of individual foraging. So group catch might not have been so important, might not be much larger than the value of individual foraging, as it is for chimps, for instance, that hunt only these small monkeys and most of the time live off luscious leaves and fruits that they have all year round, at least most chimps. And while in other circumstances, the group catch might have been really substantial and really important for the diet. And then I assume bands of these little agents, some of whom are non-cooperators, or in this context would never share food with a hungry individual, and the blue ones are those who would share food. So if somebody is hungry next to me, is currently below the starvation level, and I am currently above, if I'm a cooperator, I would give something to the individual up to my starvation level. So I would not kill myself for it. So it's not altruism in some meanings of this word, but it's more like selfish cooperation. So I will share the excess food with this individual. And this food sharing, it could be just tolerated scrounging. Maybe I'm just more tolerant. So I'm allowing this individual to have part of my food. And if in the band we have a few of those, and we can assume that we have, because chimps also have tolerated scrounging, and we can assume maybe a little bit more developed this trait in some of the individuals. And then let's say that in the fission periods, the band separate in foraging groups like this. And some of the foraging groups have more cooperators and some have none. And now as the day passes, and maybe several days, some of the individuals might fall below the starvation level. So whatever they catch individual is not enough, they're hungry, and so depending how fast you want the model to run, they can be either dead or they just leave and go on their own. Basically, the group does not stay together. And now, if the group manages to stay together with all the individuals still present, then they have a rare opportunity to catch something together, a group catch. If they get a group catch, now everybody is full up to their satiation level, and when they come back to the band, they have advantage towards those they have advantage over those individuals who were in the foraging groups that did not have cooperators and they did not stay together. And so little by little, cooperation has some chance to develop. And so when they're here, they have the opportunity to reproduce. And so because of this little advantage, over time, cooperation might develop.
I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
understand. So when the subgroups rejoin or come together to form the large group,
Mm-hmm.
the propensities for to tolerate scrounging or to share don't change between the actors, and the food availability doesn't change. It's just the total number of individuals change.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And is the reproductive rate the same for the cooperators and the non-cooperators?
So the reproduction happens with it's a function of the energy level. So if you're even if you're a non-cooperator, but you're in a band with a cooperator, you'll have a higher chance to reproduce. Yes.
And in the fission, individuals aren't preferentially selecting partners for the
No preferential selection. And then, one can make it more formally. So just to see how exactly the model works like this. So there is certain environmental trend, that was this green line. And then there is a certain population of size n. I have 150, or I experimented with different others. And there is a certain initial proportion of cooperators. Those are these blue guys. And then in each kind of period, what happens is that the group fissions in foraging groups of size n for t time steps. If the group size is sufficient, group catch is possible of a certain value with certain probability. If they do not catch something, they forage individually with a success that's modeled by this green line. And then occasionally they will fall below the starvation level. If they fall below the starvation level, cooperators might share something with them. If not, they will leave the group or die. And so this goes on over the foraging period. When the foraging is over, they fuse, reproduce. Dead are replaced with offspring of individuals not maxed necessarily, with a probability proportional to the energy. And then there is certain small mutation which just dampens the spread of cooperation, because it always goes back to the initial proportion of cooperators.
And when is energy calculated? That is there any energy storage?
Yeah, it's summed up over. So the energy that's relevant for reproduction is summed over the whole foraging period, over the spread. Okay, so this goes on. There are many replications. One more boring table, but just kind of to make it clear. So there are, of course, several parameters that we can model here, and we really try to keep them at minimum, and we try to tie each one of them to this research on early human evolutionary history as much as possible. Of course, it's kind of abstract, but basically environmental trend can be varied from 0.1 to 0.5, and this is important in the relationship to the starvation level, which is always 0.1. So basically, the value of individual foraging can be more or less different from the starvation level. What else we have? We have variability of individual foraging success. We experimented how large are those fluctuations. And then the initial proportion of cooperators can be quite low, 0.1 or 0.5. Or mutation rate is quite low, but of course, realistically, it should be even lower. But this goes against development of cooperation, so that's how we left it for now. And then we have population size 150 didn't really make a difference. Size of foraging group for 1 to 10. Length of foraging trip from 1 to 10 time steps. Value of group catch. We experimented with various. Of course, the bigger the better, but we just kept it at the most conservative level. That basically, if somebody catches a group, it's equal to whatever they could catch individually over the whole foraging period. But it's kind of for sure, as opposed to, okay, you can die, sometimes you can starve. And then probability of group catch, which is basically a reflection of the success of group to hunt together, can be relatively low to relatively high. Okay. And yeah.
Sorry, I have a question. So where is the cost to the catcher of the scrounging? As you said that the successful hunter will tolerate scrounging up to the point that it crosses starvation.
Yes, if not helped, cooperation. It's not a parameter. It's something. So if you are giving, you will give E minus S. So you'll give excess food up to your starvation level. So it's
And how much you give up to your starvation level is just determined by the number of scroungers in your group?
You as a cooperator, at least in this model, you're always helping to only one other individual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it really makes a difference how many, what is the number of cooperators and the starving members. So you only have the capability, or model says, in the model, you only help to one other individual. Yeah. It's a simplification.
And how much you help them is a function of how far below the starvation level they are?
No, just if they're below, then if you're a cooperator, you will help. You will give whatever you can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You give whatever you
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so next I will show you results for the most important parameters. So this is the average value of individual catch. So how much I can catch on my own. For the initial proportion of cooperator, where there are fewer or more. And then for the different sizes of foraging group, or for different number of time steps, and probability of group catch. And this is all conveniently, almost everything is in this picture. So let me just explain. So, okay. First, the red things are when cooperation develops. Red is good. Blue is when it actually drops below the initial level. This is for the initial level of cooperation of 0.1. So there's 10% of cooperators in the band. And when you see greenish, that means nothing changes much. The warmer it is, the more cooperators we have. Or, yeah. Okay, so in rows, we have the increase from 0 probability to catch something as a group, PG equals 0, to the highest probability to catch something as a group, PG equals 0.9. So this is probability of group catch. And the large x-axis probability of group catch. So nothing, so this group is totally incompetent. They're like baboons. They don't catch anything together. And here, they're quite good. They're good hunters. They can catch a lot. Okay. Then we have average value of individual catch. This is basically how rich the environment is. Here is quite poor environment. So here, what you can catch individually is almost equal to the starvation level. So basically, you're just managing here. And here is like everyone can catch individually quite a lot. This is environment 0.5. Okay, and then within each little graph, we have on the x-axis is the length of foraging trip from only 1 day to 10 days. And on the y-axis, we have a size of foraging party from 1 to 10 individuals. So what we see is kind of interesting, is that cooperation develops most for intermediate group sizes. So obviously, it will not develop for only one person because there is no one to help, right? It's just me. Or for only 1 day because, as it is set up now, if you immediately catch a group catch, there was no need to help anyone. So you're lucky immediately. It was great. And so the cooperation will develop for intermediate group sizes from like 3 to 6, 7 individuals. And then for environments that are just above the starvation level, 0.2, 0.3, the richer the environment, there's no need to help. So there's no need for cooperation. Everybody can survive on their own, almost everyone. So here is where the cooperation develops. And then, interestingly, if the group is very successful, so they can catch something already on the first day, or like very soon, then there is no need to save, so there's less need to save others. So then we have less cooperation for really, really successful group. We have it most when group is kind of so-so. And then not much when, or not at all when the group is really not very successful. Questions? This is the main, this is the most complicated graph, I think. Yes.
Could you give the intuition again for on the bottom, on the very bottom, right?
Uh-huh.
Why is there cooperation most in the middle there?
This is
Why does it even appear at all?
oh well, it still happens because of the variability. It still happens that occasionally sometimes fall below the starvation level and needs to be helped. Although the environment is quite rich, it's 0.5, but it can happen that occasionally, very rarely, somebody needs to be helped. And then it's good to have a cooperator to maintain the group size so that they can catch the group catch.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not quite getting the intuition for why, when the probability of group catch is so big, you don't see.
So it's if it's 0.9, that means that maybe already on the first time step, they will catch something immediately. So nobody will have the opportunity to starve. If nobody is starving, then the cooperator does not need to help. So they just go out and immediately, so we don't have to maintain each other before in this model.
So in other words, in your model, on the right there, people are in fact engaging in group activities.
They are engaging in group activities.
But you don't call it cooperation.
Good point. Yeah. So this is cooperation model in terms of food sharing. So now we don't need to share individually foraged food with a starving member, because this will not develop because there are no starving members. So you're completely right. There is another form of cooperation that's now killing this more basic one, reducing the.
So the success they would get on the right-hand part of this graph would be because of what kind of cognitive abilities?
Yeah. It's probably so maybe some kind of social cognitive abilities to coordinate, to have joint. One of these things: joint intentionality, maybe better use of tools.
Just not sure.
So maybe this clarifies it a little bit. It's a little hard to see in the rightmost column, but most of the squares are yellowish green. They're not green. So that's telling us they cooperate a little, but whenever they do, they bring everybody above starvation. So they don't need to do any more than that. So it's not that there is no cooperation in the rightmost column. It's just that it never flourishes to the point that there are consistent cycles of iterated cooperation.
Right. It does not develop more than.
They don't need to.
Right, I guess what I was confused about is that the cooperation.
You're right.
Group hunting is not
Yeah.
defined as cooperation.
Yeah. Good point. In this model, okay. I should revert back to the more exact term, food sharing,
Right.
which is modeled here as cooperation.
So in those, so when in the okay, so
Yeah.
in the group hunting success is high, you're just taking for granted that they're able to solve these coordination
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah, it's assumed that they somehow can really successfully hunt. But this can be for various reasons.
Yeah.
It could be that animals they hunt are really easy to catch, or they have good tools, or they're actually doing group cooperation.
So, but if in that lower right-hand quadrant, right, so there you've got the probability of group catch is much higher than the probability of individual catch, and shouldn't that then affect the energy that then affects the reproductive rate, so that you still get an imbalance where you would wind up with more cooperators because they're able to reproduce at a faster
But they
rate?
will only reproduce if they have higher energy. If everybody is getting enough without cooperators. So if the foraging bandit does not have any cooperators, can catch the same as cooperators in the terms of food sharing, can catch the same group catch as those who have cooperators, then cooperators don't matter. So they themselves, these bands will not have higher energy, and they will not be favored. Uh-huh.
Maybe this is clear, but so when you're talking about food sharing, this isn't food sharing of the group catch. This is food sharing of the individuals who are individually foraging, but then sharing within their group, right?
Yeah.
Dyadic. It's always a dyadic.
Right.
It's always that.
Okay.
I don't even go into this, unequal sharing of the group catch and all these complications. It's just assumed that somehow when they catch the group catch, everybody is satiated. They all have enough. And of course, one can then model intricacies of, only the one who catches the prey gets more and so on. But that's not, didn't model this here.
Yeah, so then when are they, so if you're in this foraging group and you have T going from 1 to 10, then are you individually foraging on each of those days as well as, so you're in a foraging party. Each individual in that foraging party is individually foraging each day with
Yes.
some probability of success.
Yeah.
And then as a group, they're also engaging in some probability of group hunts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how the model is set up. They first the model looks whether they caught something as a group. Then it lets them to forage individually within the forage. So whatever, if they're starving in this step, it's going to be seen in the next one. Somehow it's just how it's set. But.
So is there any cost?
There's a mistake in what you said, sorry, or a misunderstanding. And you said, is that right? And she said, yes. And if I understand the model right, there's a component in there. There's no group activity. What Mirta is calling cooperation is just, if I have food and you're going to starve, I share my food with you up to the point that I would starve, whether or not that gets you past the starvation threshold. That's the only cooperation that's in there, okay? So it isn't cooperation in the sense of increasing returns on investment. That is, it's not that by virtue of a joint hunt, my caloric return is elevated. It's risk buffering. The probability that anyone in this subgroup will fall below the survival threshold is reduced when anyone who is above that, with some probability based on the dyadic allocation, will bring them up to it. So it's standard kind of Elizabeth Cashton style risk buffering.
It's true, but then in addition, if the group stays together, then they can catch this group catch. And then the whole group will be better off than the group that did not stay together, where somebody died. So it's this indirect.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So if you're assessing whether they caught or something or not as a group first before you let them individually forage, is there a cost to hunting but being unsuccessful such that then their probability of individually foraging goes down because they lose time?
No.
Okay, so they're just,
No.
it's automatic, you have to roll the dice.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll proceed. Okay, and this is just for the case. The only conditions of those that I showed that we didn't see is if we start with a higher proportion of cooperators. This is now when we have 50% of cooperators in the initial band. And now we see that actually compared to this previous one, cooperation develops in fewer cases. So it develops actually, not develops. So develops means increase above the 0.5. Sometimes it's actually even, so here it even drops. So there is too many cooperators, and I will show, give an intuition later why it is. Too many cooperators again. So there is some kind of a good number of cooperators. More than that is not needed, and then it basically dampens the further development of cooperation. Okay, I'll gloss over it and come to it later. I will show the next one, where it just shows whether cooperative bands fare better. So this is like, so we go through the whole, for many replications, for many periods for a band, and then a band ends up having either more than 10% cooperators or less than 10% cooperators. And so those bands will end up with more cooperators than they started with. I look in theirs, how big they are, what's the percent difference in number of live members, and what's the percent difference in average individual energy of the members in bands with fewer or less cooperators than 0.10. And then these bars here show this difference between more cooperative and less cooperative bands. The blue bars show difference in average individual energy. The red bars, difference in number of live members. These differences are very small, but they're pretty consistent. So when cooperation develops in these kind of middle areas here, it is also useful. So while we do not model group level selection here, any kind of group competition, there is no such thing. But this maybe can give intuition of what would happen if a band composed with a little bit more cooperators in terms of food sharing. How would it fare compared to the band in a conflict with the band with fewer? Okay, so now I was saying this is, we're interested in how can we say more about the role of interdependence. So this assumed underlying mechanism here is interdependence. So not reciprocity, not direct reciprocity. So I'm sharing food with another person without expecting that the person will give me back. It's just that I have a stake in this person's life. It's nice that so for me it is useful that this person is around, so the next time there is an opportunity for group catch, we can do it. And so one simple model of interdependence was developed by Roberts. I mean, it's just obviously looks very much like Hamilton kinship selection formula, where R is replaced with S. This is a stake in the recipient's fitness of the cooperator. And it can be more precise, a little bit more precisely expressed as difference in cooperator's fitness before and after cooperation over difference in recipient's fitness before or after this act of cooperation. And then if this stake is larger than 0, and even better, larger than 1, cooperation has a chance to develop because of this interdependence. And again, interdependence is just mutualism within species. And so this is kind of cute, and we were wondering how can we put our model in some way in this kind of relationship to see maybe a little bit more clearly what drives or what are the important aspects of development of cooperation. And so I will gloss over it again because I'm already talking a lot, but basically you can represent our model in a simplified way which still produces results that I showed, at least approximately, as a tree. You can look at what happens to an individual each day of foraging, given whether the individual starves or does not starve, and what is the number of starving members, this is M, relative to the number of cooperators in the group, which is H, and what is the probability of group catch. And then one can end, if one cooperates, one ends with these blue payoffs, otherwise with red payoffs. And then one can even, I'm giving intuition if somebody's you need to read the paper, but we can even look at only some parts of this model that are most important. One is when does the possibility that the group is incomplete, that somebody dies, which is a function of starvation level, and this is an occasion where there is more starving members than cooperators. And then what is the event when a single cooperator is critical for the success of the group? That happens when there is exactly the same number, when there is exactly the same number of starving members and cooperators in the group. And if one person doesn't help, somebody will die, the group will not have a success. Okay, so this is this element here. And then there are only a few instances where cooperator actually pays the cost. And then one can put it in an equation that looks now a little bit better. So we can put in a relationship this multiplication of stakes and benefits over costs as probability that the whole group stays together times probability that a single cooperator has a critical function that if he or she does not help, the group will not catch something together, plus the number of times the cooperator needs to pay the cost. And then each of these has also a simple equation behind it. And then we can kind of analyze this and see that cooperation, as I showed in this previous graph, is most likely for intermediate group sizes, for a lower proportion of cooperators. Because if it's too many cooperators, then extra cooperators above the starvation level in the model will be helping, but for no reason. So, I mean, we just need as many cooperators as there are starving members. Otherwise, it's just a waste of cooperation. And then it's most likely when value of individual catch is close to starvation, and then there is a large potential of group catch. Okay. Discussion and speculations. So to summarize all this, it seems that we can show that heightened interdependence and with it higher propensity for food sharing will develop when individual foraging is difficult but not impossible, when foraging in small groups is profitable, so group can catch something together, and when there is a scarce population in fission-fusion dynamics, so we have this separation in these groups, and every member is valuable. Every member's life matters, and because the population density is so low that to find another individual, you need to walk many days and so on. And so this leads to heightened propensity to share food with non-kin. And now one can speculate further. This is pure speculation. So we can imagine what would be the underlying mechanism of this heightened propensity to share food with non-kin? Well, one could be, it could be increase in empathy. So somebody's crying, please give me food, and I'm a little bit more, or maybe some kind of tolerance also. But okay, let's speculate that it might be some kind of increase in empathy for other person's suffering. And now that's interesting to think about because part of empathy's underlying neural mechanism is speculated to be in mirror neurons, which are found all over the brain and are found not only in humans, but also in monkeys and even in birds. And it's a mechanism that these neurons fire both when a person does an activity himself or herself and when one observes the same action in another individual. And this mechanism is speculated to be important for social learning. So basically the same neurons will fire in me when you lift the fork and when I lift the fork. So I kind of learn the activity just by observing you. And similar mechanisms have been found in processes of empathy. So observed emotions are reflected also in my emotional space. And so it has been found also that the propensity for imitation and propensity for empathy for other individuals are correlated. And that lesions in the areas related to imitation also lead to impairments in empathic ability. And some would even suggest that autistic children who have problems with both imitation and empathy might have some disturbance in these kind of areas. Okay, so now it's interesting to think about it, because if increase in empathy, if there was an initial increase in empathy, maybe this helped a little bit to increase the ability for social learning. If you can learn from each other, now the value of grouping increases, and which in turns increases the benefit of helping each other. And so we might be seeing a coevolution of ability to empathize and ability to imitate. And this can be shown maybe in two ways. At first, maybe it can lead to the heightened propensity or ability to socially learn, might have led to a little bit increase in social cognition, maybe encephalization, maybe in delayed maturation because of all of this ability to socially learn, and maybe might have promoted cooperative breeding later on. Maybe this might have been one mechanism. I'm speculating here, okay? So this could be one mechanism that contributed to the increased value of cooperative breeding in humans. And later on, if we developed increased social learning and more grouping and more cooperation, this might have led ultimately millions of years later on my map, we might have moved from there to there, where we now have some ability for cumulative culture and for social norms and group markers, which might have led to the second stage of cooperation, described so well by Boyd and Richardson and Bowles and Gintis, where now we can, now these abilities reduce the within group differences, increase the between group differences, and now we can have cultural group selection. Okay. Now, why humans? This was the first question. Why not chimps or baboons? So speculations based on this model would say that, well, chimps were just very successful in hunting individually. So 90% of chimp diet is leaves and fruits, and they rarely need to rely, almost never they need to rely on hunting to survive. So it's just too good for them. So it would be interesting to see there are some chimps who live in more impoverished areas, and many of you certainly know more about it, but I wish I could do a research to see whether maybe they exhibit some more cooperative behaviors if they're kind of left to this, if their individual foraging is less successful, but okay. And then what about baboons? Well, baboons lived in very similar circumstances, so these arid environments. They could really profit from group foraging, but they just can't do it. They rarely hunt. Maybe once I saw one cetacean that they were seen hunting something together. They usually just go. They go as a troop, but they don't forage in groups. So they cannot profit from group catch. And then why not lions? So people always ask, why not lions? I don't know why not lions, but okay, lions are very different. But also, as I talked to one lion expert, Craig Pecker, and it seems to me that the value of individual foraging might be high for lions already. So although they hunt in groups, maybe they do not need to rely on group hunting. Maybe there are other aspects of their cooperative activity, such as defense and cooperative breeding, that are more important. Maybe it's just developed in a different way. It's a different kind of cooperation that developed there. And then the value of social learning was maybe of limited value, limited there because, I don't know, maybe you need to have tools to have something to learn. Okay, enough for this. This is, I don't know about lions, but okay, I'm starting to think about it. All right, now what about reciprocity and between group competition? Obviously, these are important mechanisms which are not in this model and which are usually the first that are thought of when trying to model the evolution of cooperation. And of course, this model does not say that they did not have a role. They certainly had a role later on, but early on, we see that some increase in cooperation is possible without these mechanisms. And certainly they had a role later on, but maybe they required some more suitable conditions, such as for reciprocity, you need to remember your previous partners and who did what. And you need to have relatively limited temporal discounting of value so that you can reciprocate in kind. You need to have some kind of numerical discrimination or some kind of symbolic idea what was done to you so that you can reciprocate later. So it's relatively enhanced. And many authors have noticed that reciprocity is not so easy actually to implement cognitively. For the between group competition, as I said many times, so there are some of these things like symbolic group markers, language, more frequent warfare that might have been more suitable for group, for between group competition, for group selection later on. Okay. Then what about alternative cooperative activities? So this is a very limited model that looks at food sharing. It might be that it could be applied to other kinds of help that were observed among at least modern hunter-gatherers. So they help each other making trails and repairing tools and acquiring honey. And they help injured. So it might be that similar mechanism is there. So that maybe it was not food sharing. Maybe it was something else, or maybe it was all of the above. But I think it might be incorporated in such a model, where you basically help to someone without expectation of direct reciprocation, but just because you need this person to be present. And then a couple of implications for the present their cooperation is that one is that people might be inherently cooperative, or at least some, right? So it might be this first impulse to help that might be inherent. So for instance, Warneken and Tomasello did tons of this research on young infants, and also there are others which would show that even 18-month-olds would help a person who is signaling, who is obviously having problems, who is asking for help on a number of different tasks. And also adults, so the research by David Rand, and Novak and others, so they would make people play these economic games under time pressure, and they try to see what happens if people need to respond fast in games such as Prisoner's Dilemma or Common Goods. And so what it seems to be happening is that when people need to respond fast, the first answer is cooperative. And only when they can think, then the answer is selfish, more selfish. Of course, on the other hand, and this shows the possible, or maybe I show this picture. This shows this importance of the second stage of evolution of cooperation, is that prosociality is very much moderated by social environment. So perhaps there is this initial impulse to cooperate, but as children grow older, in different cultures there are different norms for cooperation, and this is what we observe in these famous studies by Henrik and others, where different cultures have different propensity to punish or to cooperate in these economic games. So these are not inconsistent accounts. It just shows that it's kind of complicated. And we see traces of both, maybe this early human cooperative evolution of cooperation, where there's this early prosocial tendency, which is then moderated by all these social norms that we have later. And then finally, for present-day cooperation may be more likely to fail, it seems. There are many other reasons for failing of cooperation: when environment is too harsh or too rich, when group success is low, and when individual group members are easy to replace, which brings me back to my Balkan people. And of course, by going so far 2 million years ago, I don't know, I'm still hoping that maybe I learned a little bit about some of the underlying mechanisms for making and breaking cooperation in the modern world. Of course, with all this, the road is long, right? There is much more happening. But maybe there is something to learn from this. All right, thank you. Maybe.
Do you mind going? I know we talked about it a lot already, but going back to the first two graphs that you showed.
Yeah. You mean the data?
Yeah, the data.
Let's see.
I just need to remind myself. So when there was a high number of cooperators to start with in the second table, the ones that decreased in proportion are not necessarily the same ones that increase in proportion. The same conditions that increase in proportion in the low cooperator condition. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So you mean here it even falls? That's what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah. So it falls below 0.5. So I should do more research to see how far it goes.
Right.
Actually, I should know that. But it decreases from the initial value. So yeah, I guess I don't have the answer to the question, but I guess it comes to the level where it's kind of useful, where the number of cooperators is approximately similar to the number of starving members, so that nobody's giving in vain.
But it's not the, if you extended the time interval past 10 in the low cooperator situations, if they increase in cooperation, would you expect some of those groups to then decrease in cooperation when they reach higher proportions of cooperation?
Yeah, good point. I guess, yeah. Yeah, or maybe, so I would, okay, I have the answer to this question, because I did it for for much longer times, and actually stabilizes at a certain level.
Okay.
It comes to a certain level, it stays there.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it is both easy and unfair for the non-modeler to kibitz on the model.
Go ahead.
And say, yeah. But I mean, one sort of key feature of the model, which seems to me like when you look at real-world context starts to become a little problematic, is that so in the individual foraging context, the successful forager has complete control over the distribution of the proceeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And will share if it's the cooperative phenotype, will share up to the point that it would pass its own starvation,
Mm-hmm.
drop below its own starvation threshold. Right? Now, from the perspective of the recipient of that, right, we can think of the recipient of the aid has two potential benefits. So one is getting above the starvation threshold, and the other is maintaining the presence of that sharer, both as a future source of sharing and as just another member of the group that increases the group proceeds when there's collective activity. Right? Now, the problem emerges, what if the recipient needs more to get above the starvation threshold than the donor can give without
Mm-hmm.
dropping below the starvation threshold?
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a pure conflict of interest between those two individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you might say, well, it's a dyadic interaction, so, whether it's some,
Yeah.
endowment effect or superior phenotypic condition by virtue of food or whatever, the possessor keeps possession. Fine, but now go to your chimps, for example, and it's not a one-to-one interaction, it's a one-to-many interaction.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of, there's one monkey possessor, and there are a lot of recipients who want monkey, right? If each of them needs more than the donor can give without falling below
Then donor
threshold,
should not give, actually.
the donor shouldn't give, but the donor will lose possession, right? That's my
Mm-hmm.
point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because from the recipient's point of view, the welfare of the donor is contingent, is a function of future opportunities for the donor to help me and future opportunities for the donor's presence to contribute to the group reward, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not going to make it above starvation without taking more than the donor wants to give,
Yeah.
then I should try and take from the donor. And if there are a
That's
lot
true.
of us who are in that condition, right, now the donor faces a big problem,
Mhm.
right? So restricting it to the dyadic interaction in some ways artificially empowers the donor compared to the actual situation.
So here I'm making the donor sucker in this model, because donor gives even when it will not help, even if the guy will starve anyway, which will reduce the level of cooperation. But you're right, I don't have this many to one relationship, where actually they're trying to, so in this case, they don't even need to fight the donor, because donor is stupid and donor will just give whatever he has.
But they do if taking from the donor will push the donor below
Okay,
the
if it's
threshold,
put, that's
the
true.
donor's survival.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. And I didn't investigate exactly that, but I looked at a condition where donor gives whatever is needed to the recipient, and then it's really cooperation basically will not develop. So
And you
that's
see,
basically
so
the
one-to-many problem exacerbates
Yeah.
it, because maybe each of us recipients only needs a small amount to get
Yeah.
above threshold, but aggregated across all of us, we push the donor below survival, right? And I mean, empirically, when you look at what happens during human starvation, there are some instances in which cooperation is maintained, but it's often the case that people become very selfish, right?
That's true. That's true. And so maybe I wonder. So two things come to mind. One is that at least when it comes to colobus monkeys and chimps, it seems that the one who catches it tends to consume most of it. It's similar in lions also. So maybe there is some way that somehow, even there, the one who caught has a little bit more advantage. But on the other hand, if not, then basically I think what would happen is that this would brings us closer to this low environmental, low level of individual foraging success. So basically, in the conditions where everybody's trying to get as much as possible from the donor, we would probably just, it would be, why? So first, why would that happen? It would happen because these other individuals are hungry, they're starving. So there are many starving individuals and only one or only a few cooperators. And then these are the conditions when it does not develop or decreases. So yeah. But so I was modeling the condition in which the environment is poor and therefore the cooperation doesn't develop. And your mechanism is others are evil and they want to take as much as possible from me, which maybe has similar consequences as a poor environment, basically.
Yeah.
And now it's an empirical question. How important is one or the other? And then if it's the case of being evil, then that would speak for we cannot even develop cooperation before we have social norms, some kind of seniority or some kind of egalitarian norms, and this then complicates the whole thing.
I wouldn't frame it as evil in the sense that if I die, if you don't share, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
By
Yeah.
most moral standards, that wouldn't be evil. But empirically, you're correct that for reasons that, to my mind, remain mysterious, there is a kind of right of possession in chimps, right? That's independent
true.
of dominance position. Right?
Yeah.
So I have the colobus, even
Yeah.
if there are a lot of you, you don't just all take it from me by force.
Maybe they sold it somehow for us, so we could build on that, but I don't know. Huh. I wonder, I'm not aware actually, it's a very interesting question, what are the empirical data in human societies and how much, certainly, how much is right of possession?
There's a lot of norms about
Yeah,
actively distancing the hunter from possession. And
That's
so
true.
They are supposed to, like
Yeah,
Robert talked
drop it
about,
off.
leave the kangaroo on the outskirts.
yeah,
Everybody knows who that person is who
Yeah.
bought it now. So
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
practically in terms of the number of calories,
That's
it's
true.
hard, but there are at least social norms
Yeah.
to try to
yeah. So,
makes you think it is probably some sort of universal that needs to be overcome by
yeah. And then the question would be whether something can develop in this mechanism at all without such a social norm. And then if you need a social norm, how did we? And again, we are facing the same conundrum, chicken and egg problem. But yeah. Yes.
But there's no there's no kin selection in
No.
this model at all, right? And so, I mean, we do. So even though
I mean, they're all in the
understand
same
I
vein.
understand the Hill paper about being unrelated to most members of your group, but I mean, within that, so when they're talking about the level of the band, yeah, there are quite a few members of the band who are non-kin, but there are also, you also have kin in that group, and when you get to these kind of fission-fusion kind of situations, when you fission off, those groups, I imagine, are more highly related than the fused group as a whole.
You mean
right?
because of assortment with?
Yeah, because I think it tends to be sort of like, so the band is
Mhm.
a collection of nuclear families,
Mhm.
let's say.
Mhm.
And then when you fission off
I see.
by nuclear
Yeah,
family.
okay.
And so
Okay,
I'm
so
just
that
wondering
would.
how you think about,
Yeah.
would think if there's a way to build kin selection.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there could be just maybe positive assortment for non-cooperators or cooperators together.
Right.
And I guess it would just, I think it would just increase the speed of developing a cooperation.
Right.
So by stripping it down, we are giving less chance, I think,
So
to
you
cooperation.
don't need it for this to work.
Not to get a little bit more. Yes.
Two questions.
Mhm.
The first is clarification. Do we know when language develops?
When what? Sorry?
Language.
Do we know when
You
language?
mentioned 150,000 years.
So I think there are many different ideas, but yeah, I would say somewhere around that time is evidence that I found. But it's really difficult to infer, and some of the evidence comes from whether there is a bump in the skull around Broca area and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. But the data I could find places it between 100 to 100,000 years ago, but
So
I'm not
there
sure.
are models going back. But,
There are, but then there is, of course, I mean, what is language? Is it spoken language? Is it gestures? And
yes, but with
Yeah.
language we do have a specific center in the brain.
right.
So if there is something there, but we don't know.
Yeah, so the number I put is from such a study that infers that it might have been more developed around that time, 150,000 years ago, but
But not 2 million years ago.
not to, but although I talked to some people who are saying that, well, if not language, there might have been some communication already at that time, but obviously that's all speculations, and it's not my area of expertise to know for sure, and I am sure the estimates will change in the coming years. But I say conservatively we can say 100 to 100,000 years ago.
The key is that in her model, the benefits of being in a larger group don't stem from any active coordination among the actors.
Right.
So it's not that you and I agree that we're going to go hunt rabbits and we have a division of labor, all of which requires language to really do it successfully. It's more like being in a school of fish, where if you're in a big school of fish, you're less likely to get eaten by the predator than if you're in a small school of fish. Just the presence of the individuals increases your fitness without any cooperation among them. And in her case, perhaps something like hunting among wolves, just having lots of members of your group all engaging in the foraging activity at the same time increases the average return without there being any coordination. So it doesn't require language at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, on the philosophy behind this type of model, why do we need to explain cooperation? I mean, why do we assume that the primary state is one without cooperation, not vice versa? Why do we, how can we say what is before and what's after?
Yeah.
I mean, in trying to explain cooperation, we assume that the initial state is one without cooperation. But how do we know that? I mean, it's the same with other social animals. How can we say about not higher, not primates, but about wolves or hyenas? Can we conceive them as non-social in the beginning?
So the comparison here is, or you're right. It also the use of term cooperation is just bringing more damage than benefit because it's so ill-defined and can be. Maybe we should talk about food sharing, about defense, about group hunting, cooperative breeding, and go explain those things and not cooperation, whatever that is, or altruism, even worse, I guess. Okay. But that said, here what we try to do is just compare. Okay, what do chimps have? What do humans have and chimps don't? Chimpanzees. And we're saying, okay, if the earliest human ancestor was something close to chimps, how can we explain the difference? And so we're not saying chimps don't have cooperation, but we say, okay, chimps probably don't share food with each other. Even mother chimps will not share more or less voluntarily food with kids. And they don't. They do not help out-group individuals. So okay, and humans do. And that's all. I mean, so it's kind of a relative or a kind of more qualitative differences between sociality of perhaps a close species and us. And we are not saying that they are not cooperative, they are maybe cooperative in a different way.
So
Yeah.
cooperation does not tend to be in, let's say, inherited material of the human. Is not within, is not within the gene, is not inherited in the sense.
No, it is. They're cooperators, and they're those who share when others are in need, and they're those who don't. And that's a heritable difference. So the ones who share have offspring that are prone to share, and the ones who don't have offspring.
Here is modeled as such, right?
Yeah.
Where we are intentionally a little bit silent on genetic versus cultural inheritance, but so we do. So in any way, we do in fact say that there is some inherited cooperative tendency, which might be reflected today in children being spontaneously prosocial. So it might be that there is something in humans that's different than other animals, but for very prosaic reasons. There is nothing mysterious about it. It's just a little bit of increase in a faculty, like tolerance for scrounging, that was already present in earlier ancestors. So it's not that we are inherently better, more cooperative. In some, there is no big gap. That's, I guess, what is the message here. But that in certain environmental circumstances, particular abilities that were already there might have been enhanced, and then open door to more, to other benefits of grouping that might have then stimulated other kinds of cooperation and so on. So it's basically maybe just the beginning of a long coevolution process. I think you or sorry.
So I was just really intrigued by what you said, kind of just touched on about heritability, and maybe you're kind of agnostic as to whether it's genetic or cultural. And I was just wondering whether you could actually tweak the model to kind of look at that. If you had, say, homophily within the fission groups, and you could look at children born into areas that had a higher proportion of cooperators or a lower proportion, and as opposed to a strict parental model. And I just wondered if you hadn't, if that was.
No, that's a great idea.
You were like interested in going in, or if you're just kind of saying that that's not something that's sort of.
No, absolutely.
Able to be built into this kind of model.
I think it totally could be. And yeah, I mean, once we resolve this and finally kind of put a final dot on the paper, certainly that would be basically the. So far, I guess the implied mechanism is genetic. I didn't want to put any kind of assumption in it, any kind of social learning assumption, even of social learning of cooperation. So kind of we're agnostic, but maybe it's a more genetically. But once, if we assume a certain small level of social learning, of imitation of the norm, of the prevailing behavior in a particular group, then we would certainly just increase, I guess, the development. But I think it can be modeled, and yes, good idea.
Is PC the frequency of the cooperative type?
Yeah.
So, comparing this graph to the last, is the long-term dynamics different? Do you reach a different equilibrium when you start from a different initial frequency of cooperators? That seems unusual.
I would have to look at that.
These aren't the steady state
no.
distributions.
So I looked at I would need to look at that. Yeah. And that would be interesting indeed, because you would expect, yeah.
Whatever time step you're picking for this.
No, you're completely right. Yeah.
Then you're showing that when you start with a higher level of cooperation,
Yeah.
you decrease the amount of cooperation
Yeah.
over time more than if you start.
Yeah.
But
No, it's a good
I
question.
want to know what the equilibrium level is.
Right. And so I went to the 100-time step, and I should plot it in a different way to see where it ends up. But actually, I don't have currently the answer to this, sorry.
But it's hard to compare the two graphs because the colors don't mean the same thing.
Right, yeah, so I need to.
Relative to baseline where you started, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the second one, the frequency of the cooperators is much higher than in the first one. So the colors where are you relative to that higher frequency? So you can't just look at the maps and say, well, the colors are different.
Yeah, that's the problem with these maps. They are not. They don't have the level of detail.
So what is 0.45 on this graph, on this view?
Just
So
the proportion.
You've got the bar on the right there, right?
Yeah, that's the
AC
final
is-
proportion.
that blue is 0.45.
Yeah,
What does that mean?
that's the proportion of cooperators after the simulation has run.
So it's not relative to this.
It is, because if you show the other graph,
Then it's 0.1 in the middle.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's what he's asking. So how is this,
But
right? That's what you're asking. You want to know,
I want to know.
can I compare them?
equilibrium
Exactly.
is.
Yeah. Good question.
Okay.
Yes.
Just one thought, when you're talking about cooperation or food sharing, what you're talking about is the propensity or the willingness for individual to share food with somebody who, let's say, goes starvation. That's the kind of cooperation
Yeah.
you're referring to. So that's a specific kind of cooperation.
Yeah.
And saying, well, we can increase the frequency of that. But we could be looking at other specific kinds of cooperation. For example, mothers cooperate in terms of feeding their offspring,
Yeah.
whether it's primates, humans, or whatever, so that at that level, we can say, well, 50% of the population are cooperators, because all women are cooperative with respect to feeding their offspring. But now, the sort of the big picture you're talking about, the other end of sort of this large scale, everybody cooperating with everybody, isn't talking about specific acts of cooperation like this, not saying, how did we get, how do we get large scale cooperation of that kind from very specific acts? The mere fact that I'm willing to share some of my food with somebody who's starving
Does not mean.
doesn't translate just by virtue of waving our hands and saying, oh, we got group selection.
Yeah.
Therefore, that accounts for large scale cooperation in a broad sense.
Yeah.
Because you really are talking about changing the kinds of cooperation along the way. You're just talking about one kind of cooperation.
Right.
So that gap you originally talked about sounds like is as large as ever, which is, that is because the big models are not focusing just on a specific kind of cooperation. We're trying to talk about cooperation in a broad sense, whereas this is just simply introducing one particular kind of cooperation. We could have just started out with saying, well, we have females who are cooperating, it's already 50%, therefore, we now can just evoke the large-scale models and don't have any more work to do.
Yeah. So here's where we can speculate further. So, and here's where I try to speculate about what could be the underlying mechanism of food sharing. And if the underlying mechanism of food sharing is maybe something like empathy, then this might have promoted some other kinds of sociality, such as social learning, imitation, which then might have increased the value of grouping. And then, so it's just the starting of the coevolution towards other forms of cooperation. So this first increase in empathy might have resulted in a little bit better social cognition in terms of either learning or understanding each other's intentions, or just empathy, which might have increased then other forms of cooperation, such as cooperative breeding. So if if an unrelated child cries, maybe I feel something, and so I'm helping it because I have this heightened capacity, heightened empathic level. And then once this is happening, this then enables a host of other things. So if there is cooperative breeding, then the maturation can be delayed, the brains can be larger, can learn more socially. So it's just, there is no simple answer. It's not like, okay, now we develop food sharing, it's all solved, but it's just opening the door, right, for going further.
Okay.
So yeah. No,
I think we have
that's,
to-
oh, we are over time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.